Is political correctness ruining comedy?
See, senorita, it clearly is.
Chances are, if you've spoken to an old white guy in the past few months, you've heard a phrase like this.
Political correctness is ruining comedy. What am I supposed to do when I point at something? Not laugh at it?
Oh, do you mean people like John Cleese, who are old white guys who rely on their freedom of speech not being curtailed in favour of political correctness to tell the type of comedy they want to tell? Oh, I don't know. Apart from that, I haven't really heard many old white guys speak about this shit because most of those are dead, sadly. And besides, what is this that I see before me? Some kind of straw man? Uh-oh. Speaking of Monty Python, this calls for the intro.
Hello everyone, this is Traveling Man 90. Ugh! Damn it, I can't see a thing in this.
Ridiculous.
It truly is ridiculous, isn't it? Really. It just totally is. I can't agree with you more, Mr. Strawman.
So today let's talk about political correctness. What is it? And is it slashing away at our freedom of speech like a top-billed star in a terrible Friday the 13th knockoff? We'd call it Saturday the 30th and it would take place in a European discotheque.
No, that is a terrible joke. That was not funny at all. That was terrible. Really. It was really bad. You need to sort out your, humour. Feminist humour, people. Feminist humour. There's going to be a lot of this. And to answer your question, yes. Yes, it is, but you've already got the answer, and now you're just trying to get to it. Like every feminist argument that's ever been told.
Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah, definitely.
Political correctness is the act of choosing your words to avoid offending people.
Now, if only you were truly honest about that statement, because that's not the only thing. Although, you could argue that it kind of encompasses the whole thing, but this is what Google says, and this says, the avoidance of forms of expression or action that are perceived to exclude, marginalise, or insult groups of people, or people who are socially disadvantaged or discriminate against. So, basically, it's not just choosing your words carefully because you might offend someone. It might actually exclude these people. It might even marginalise these people because apparently words are strong enough to do this in the first place. And besides, these are jokes we're talking about. Jokes are going to offend someone. You'll be surprised how many people can be offended by just the slightest harmless joke. You'll be very surprised. And besides, offence is always taken, never given. So, who's to say this joke will offend one person, not the other? So what's the point in this?
The English language has a storied history of making up words to call people who aren't white guys.
Wait, what did you just say? Did you just say that those words are used to describe people who aren't white guys? You do realise guys have been called bitches a lot throughout the years since that word was first coined by English tongues? Men have been called bitches and are continually being called bitches. Bitch is not really a gendered insult like you think it is. It's so funny, isn't it, how you all try to say that specific things aren't gendered, but you will say things are gendered to suit your narrative. And what was funny was you just censored yourself from using a dirty word. You said shitty, and you censored yourself. That's quite ironic, isn't it, considering political correctness is supposedly not censoring comedy or killing it, like what Dick Coughlin or other people say. Isn't that funny?
And for the people who those words were directed at, it really, really sucked to hear.
Yeah, it sucks being called a bitch. It really does, no matter who you are. But the fact is, I don't know what that has to do with comedy and political correctness.
Political correctness became a derogatory term itself in the 1980s, when old school stand-up comedians could say whatever they want and were essentially treated like rock stars for it.
Well, yes, because you see, in the 1980s, they had what's called freedom of speech, like unfettered freedom of speech, you know, kind of like what America still has for a limited time only, and what we no longer have over here in the UK and elsewhere in Europe. They could say what they want, because by law, they could say what they want, and nobody could really question that or do anything against them. Certainly, there was some lawsuits in the 70s and the 60s where they couldn't say what they could say, and they had to challenge the Supreme Court saying, look, we should be allowed to say certain words on stage. Lenny Bruce, for example, got arrested for saying the word cocksucker on stage, and I think, as usual, my other go-to, George Carlin, also got arrested for swearing on stage in the 70s. So it was only a very recent thing that they could say what they could say. Eddie Murphy most likely would have been arrested in the 60s for saying the shit he said in Delirious. And they weren't considered rock stars because they could say what they could say. They were rock stars because they were funny. They were funny. Delirious was successful because it was funny. Yeah, the type of humour is different. Like, you wouldn't see all the jokes about gay people and all those celebrities anymore because, well, Eddie Murphy's now family friendly and not many people do that anymore. But the fact is, he was successful because he was funny, and it's still funny. It holds up, in my opinion. It's better than Raw, though.
It was very in vogue to say racist, misogynistic, and, because it's the 80s, AIDS-phobic stuff.
Yes, because humour is subjective and humour changes throughout the decades. And besides, give me examples. Give me examples of 80s comedians who were AIDS-phobic, or people who were misogynist, or people who were racist. Please tell me, because Eddie Murphy was probably all three of those things by your standards. But because he's Eddie Murphy, does he get away with it or not? Because, you know, But that's besides the point. Who are these people? You can't just generalise an entire decade, especially a decade you clearly did not live in. I mean, I don't know when you were born, but even then you won't remember it, even if you were born in like 1989 or something. You will not remember the 80s, okay? You cannot just generalise an entire genre of comedy from a particular point in time and say it was all just these things when you do not know, and you're not giving me certain comedians who espouse this bullshit.
And you'd get the laugh because you were, ooh, being naughty.
Well, yeah, that's how crude humour works. At least the crude humour of the 1980s, and the 90s, and the 2000s, and the 2010s. I could go back as well and say the 70s, and the 60s, and the 50s, and the 40s. That's how it works. Because, oh, we just said a naughty thing. It's funny. Yes, that's how it works. But then again, that whole decade was not crude. Cosby was massive back then, and he's a clean comedian. I mean, say what you will about him now, but the fact remains his comedy was not crude.
My favourite example of this is Andrew Dice Clay, if only because I get to mention that he was the very first contestant fired on Season 2 of Celebrity Apprentice.
Ah, so you finally give me an example of a comedian from the 1980s who said things that you find offensive, even though back then it wasn't considered offensive, and even today, to some people, that is not offensive. And he still has the right to say that, by the way, and he's a successful comedian, so he has a big enough audience to find that funny and to make him successful. What's your problem? Why can't he say this shit?
Leveraging political incorrectness for comedy is a lot like another popular 80s relic, cocaine.
What are you talking about? People still take cocaine, you idiot. That's not an 80s relic. Some of my friends take cocaine. I don't, because it's not my thing. But they take it. It's clearly not a relic. It's a drug that has been used for nigh 100 odd years now. It's been a regular thing since the 19th century, love. It is not a relic of the 1980s, even if it reached its zenith of popularity in the 80s. Mainly because it was illegal, and also rock stars were like, yeah man. And besides, what do you mean, leveraging political correctness? What do you mean? Nobody's leveraging it at all. They just want to tell the jokes they want to tell and not be told how they can and cannot say it and who they can and cannot joke about.
Back then, everybody was doing it, but nowadays whipping that shit out at a party just seems kind of pathetic.
You have no idea what people think about cocaine, and besides, you'll be surprised how popular cocaine still is. It's quite weird.
Using politically incorrect language is an intentionally alienating practice.
How so? How is it alienating? How can it alienate someone? How can a word alienate someone? Actions can alienate someone. So, for example, saying, here, this fountain is for black people, this fountain is for white people. That is alienating, is it not? But words cannot be alienating, because there might be one black person who thinks, oh, that's funny. And another one will think, God damn it, I am offended, I am alienated. Words can be very subjective. Comedy is subjective. You cannot prove either way that these words are alienating. You just cannot, because in order to do so, you have to collectivise and group all these ethnic minorities and LGBT people all together and make them a group, when they're a demographic of individuals who all have their different opinions.
That reminds the people hearing it that, at the end of the day, their humanity can be boiled down to a single horrible epithet.
That's funny, because you are FartSatan. You really are FartSatan. If anyone has seen Dr. Anna McCann's video about her on Halloween, please watch it. It's so funny. But the thing is, a lot of races have loads of different epithets assigned to them. It's not just one whole epithet. Besides, Are white people also included in this political correct mumbo jumbo? Because you can call them crackers, honkies, Neanderthal things, toilet seat complexions, to quote Black Goebbels. Are these included in that? No, obviously not, because white people are the oppressors, obviously.
And that really sucks, especially when it's such a preventable behavior.
Actually, it's not preventable. You can't stop people saying what they want to say unless you inscribe it by law. Sadly, the First Amendment does not allow you to do that. Although, that said, you could probably get them to court by saying they're using farting words, but, good luck with that. Besides, so what if it sucks? Big deal. People get their feelings hurt over words every day. These words exist. You can either take the power away from them, like what we've been trying to do for the last 50 years, or you can continue to put more power into them by using this political correctness, social justice claptrap.
So we know what political correctness is, and we know when it became a slur itself.
It's not a slur, though. It's definitely a dirty word, but it's not a slur. A slur is something like Paki or mulatto or half-caste, not political correctness. It is not a slur. It is a term or a dirty word, I guess, like feminism, but they're not slurs.
But the question remains, is it ruining comedy? What this argument really boils down to is your definition of free speech.
She's right, it boils down to definitions of free speech, and this is where we get bogged down. But then again, I could just turn to the law and say, yeah, but I can say these things because the law says I can say these things.
Namely, that everyone has a right to it, even the people who don't agree with you.
If only this video actually espoused that very meaning of the word free speech. But hey, whatever.
Comedy specifically thrives on being able to creatively express an opinion in a surprising or thoughtful way. Making a joke completely falls under your right to free speech.
Actually, a joke doesn't have to be an opinion, it can just be taking the mickey out of something and saying, oh look, that thing's ridiculous. Or look at this thing that we do. Look at that chicken, it has like a weird thing about it. Or why did certain thing cross the road? Or puns even. That doesn't necessarily mean it's expressing an opinion, it's just a joke. A joke does not have to express an opinion, it's just making fun of something. Some jokes do express opinions, but not all.
But the audience reacting to that joke falls under their right to free speech. And that doesn't mean heckling, I mean responding in a broader way, like writing a review online, or talking to you about it after the show, that kind of thing. Only assholes heckle, kids. Don't do it.
I don't see what their right to free speech has to do with the comedian being able to say what he has to say. Yeah, they can react to him, so what? But that doesn't mean that he then cannot say what he just said on that stage. And stop censoring yourself, please, it's not ironic. Besides, heckling is an important part of comedy, it's where a lot of laughs come from. If a comedian wrecks someone harshly, you get big fucking laughs. And if he bombs, if he can't respond to the heckler, he gets booed off stage or something. That's even funny for the audience. But I know, yeah, it's an arsehole-ish thing, but it's important. So, only arseholes tell people what they can and cannot do.
The more you know.
Yeah, that was not funny at all.
For example, let's say I'm doing a stand-up show and I'm doing a bit about pasta. I hate pasta. Your linguine. I don't want to eat it because to me it tastes like the Pillsbury Doughboy is rubberized flour down my throat. That is me creatively expressing my very real opinion, which falls under my freedom of speech rights.
Yeah, and so what? Not all jokes have to be about an opinion or to express said opinion. You do realise that, right?
Now, say you love linguine. You're Linguini's #1 fan, and let's face it, linguine has been the #2 noodle on everybody's list ever since that asshole spaghetti booked that gig in Lady and the Tramp.
Oh look, reference! Aren't I funny?
You have the right to say to me, hey, just so you know, Linguini is kind of the underdog here. Remember Lady and the Tramp? When's the last time you saw Linguini being portrayed fairly in a movie? Why you gotta add to the Linguini hate? Now that criticism is obviously negative, but that doesn't change my right to perform my pasta act. I just have to perform it, knowing that some people are going to think that way about linguine every time I do it. But the important thing to note is, nobody is trying to stop me from performing that act.
Yeah, sorry, but ask all the myriad of SJWs who said you cannot say this thing about Caitlyn Jenner, or about other trans people, or black people, or Asian people. Look at all the people who jumped on Ricky Gervais and Stephen Fry recently when they told jokes that they didn't like. They were told that they cannot say this, they cannot do that. Or hell, Tosh, when he made his rape joke about replacing his sister's pepper spray with those sprinkly things. Even though he was not lampooning rape victims, it was trying to lampoon the rapists, and to say, look at my horrible action, look what I did. Oh, I can't remember the joke exactly, but when you watch it, you know for a fact he is not ridiculing the act itself. People said that he couldn't joke about that, and there was debates about what you can and cannot joke about. Political correctness is trying to stop people, or rather people using political correctness are trying to stop people from saying what they have to say.
They're just letting me know that it's a little bit offensive.
Yeah, but that's their subjective opinion. You did not give offence to them, they took it, remember? It's completely subjective. Just because they were offended doesn't mean the joke itself is actually offensive. Even Seinfeld is offensive to SJWs, and he has a clean comedy act. He's not a politically correct comedian, funnily enough. As I say, there is a difference, but I can't really get into it in this video. It'll have to be a separate one, because it really is, a subjective thing that will take me a while to think of. But anyway, back on point. Why do you have to be made aware that it's offensive to this one group of people when everybody else doesn't find it offensive? That's already making you think, well, these people find it offensive. These people are loud. Maybe I should not make this joke anymore. Like, one of the reasons why Chris Rock does not do his black people versus niggers routine or anything like that is because he got quite a bad reaction from politically correct people.
And what I do with that information when I receive it will completely depend on how my ego digests negative audience feedback. It can be hard for creative people, especially comedians, to hear negative feedback about something they worked very, very hard on. Remember how I said in the 80s stand-ups were treated like rock stars? Yeah, nobody said no to them.
Yes, they did, actually. Yes, they did. In Britain, we had our very own social justice warrior, although really, now she'd be called a traditional justice warrior because she wasn't left-wing, she was right-wing. Mary Whitehouse, who would bleat on about what you can and cannot say on TV, what you can and cannot show on TV. There were people who were very vocal about these things, especially the Christian right, which she was a part of. They were the ones who were spearheading all these authoritarian pushes to stop people from playing Dungeons and Dragons and saying jokes that lampooned them. Hell, even Muslims are doing it already. This isn't necessarily comedy, but Salman Rushdie had a fatwa on him for making a novel. So there were people who said no, but they weren't listened to as much as they are now. Because when you're loud enough, vociferous enough, and have enough support, you can force somebody to stop doing something, as is the case nowadays with the social media hate mobs that social justice warriors use. You see, back in the 80s, the internet didn't even exist. Yeah, modems existed, but not what we have. So there was no way you could coordinate a whole group of people to stop a comedian from going to a club or going to tell a joke at said club if they can't get him to stop performing. You see what I mean? Completely different. You can't compare the 80s to now. And besides, comedians are still considered rock stars. In fact, they play at even bigger bloody venues than they ever did in the 80s.
This is a new thing for a lot of those old school guys.
No, it's not. You ask any of these old guys and they will say that, yeah, we just ignore them, we do our thing and we carry on. These people know that there's going to be people who don't like them telling jokes about things that they don't like and will try to stop them. This is not a new thing, like I've already demonstrated. George Carlin had to go through it. Joan Rivers used to go through it through her entire career. She was more offensive than anyone. Anyone. And obviously Lenny Bruce got arrested for saying cocksucker. I know I'm using the same examples, but come on. It's not an old thing. In the 80s, they had the exact same problems as comedians in the 2000s, the 90s, and beyond, okay? And that's never going to change, because people don't find things funny.
And instead of digesting criticism in the way that a comedian is supposed to, because remember, your job is to make the audience laugh, they're kicking up a tantrum like a toddler in the Disney store who just found out that singing Elsa doll that they've been coveting for months is completely sold out. And they just can't let it go! Let it go! Please don't sue me, Disney.
What you're describing is censorship. These comedians have had to deal with this shit for years. Years. They are not self-entitled egomaniacs who can't take criticism. They could take the criticism. They could choose to ignore it, like a lot of people do, or take it on board, like Sarah Silverman did, and change her act completely and make it unfunny because she's politically correct. And nowadays, oh God, they could do all these things, okay? They could do all these things, But what you're describing is not fair criticism. You're describing people on the internet and people in government and in academia trying to force people to tell jokes that they want and to tell them not to tell jokes that they don't like, because they think that one group that they've collectivized thinks that's offensive when they can't possibly know what individuals in said groups think.
So no, political correctness is not ruining comedy.
Chris Rock, Seinfeld, loads of other people have spoken out saying that it is, because they can no longer perform at a college campus because people will get offended at everything they say. It is. They are trying to control what people say. And you can deny it all you want, but what you have described is exactly what these comedians have described people trying to do to them. And it's just disingenuous of you.
It's actually making it a hell of a lot smarter.
Really? Citation needed, because you have definitely not been particularly smart in your jokes, have you?
When you don't have exhausted old tropes and gimmicky, shocking punchlines to fall back on, you have to think of more creative ways to execute your primary directive as a comedian, which is to make the audience laugh.
So when your crude humour has been censored and you can't joke about a particular group of people, or you can't joke about a particular group of people in a specific way that you want to do, you have to now think of an entirely new act, because you can't do that, it's not politically correct. And apparently it's not killing comedy, because it's just, you know, trying to make you smarter by making you not say these things anymore. You do realise that it is censorship and you're denying someone their freedom of speech there, right?
And as an added bonus, there could be more people to hear your material, because you're not chasing groups away with exclusionary comedy about, for example, violence against women. Celebrity apprentice loser Andrew Dice Clay.
I like how you're trying to sound like you're ironic by saying dumb jokes, but your jokes are just dumb. But that's besides the point. So what if he's making jokes about violence against women? So what? He can still do that, and people find it funny. They find it funny, and you can't stop that. But you want to, so you're trying to stop him from saying these things. You see what I mean? You are a censorious little minx, aren't you? You say that you totally believe in freedom of speech, yet you're trying to stop other people's rights in order to stop saying these things, these stupid words that really are subjective, and you don't know whether or not these people are excluded or not. Because again, they're just words. They can't exclude people on their own. You need actions. You do know that, right? Besides, how do you know that these comedians are chasing people away? They play to stadiums, these people. Look at that picture. He's in a fucking stadium. He's not at some dingy club.
Whew, gosh. And
Woo, gosh, it's terrible, isn't it, people?
just to say it one more time to be completely crystal clear, there is nothing wrong with you performing your dusty old crap from 1986.
Well, apparently there is, because you just said it excludes people and it offends people. Stop contradicting yourself and stop trying to say, oh, we're totally not taking away your jokes or your right to say these jokes, but we want you to stop making these jokes then. Stop saying these things. Please. You have to pick. Either you can say these jokes or you cannot say these jokes. Make your mind up.
Nobody is suppressing your right to do that.
Yet you've just told people to stop trying to tell these jokes because they exclude people. And people are trying to stop people from using these jokes. Look what Ricky Gervais got. Look what Stephen Fry got. Look at what Sarah Silverman has done to herself. She has changed her entire act because she now wants to make money off social justice warriors, which, by the way, she won't make a penny off because social justice warriors don't watch the shit or listen to the shit or read the shit that they complain about anyway. But that's just an aside.
But there's a good chance that people are going to tell you that it is not funny anymore.
Again, it's subjectivity. So what if these people don't find it funny, these nebulous pretend people? If you're still performing to massive crowds, you're going to get the impression that most people find it funny and not this select group of people who don't find you funny. If you could gather huge crowds or sizable crowds, hell, even just a small club, but it's sold out and you're the headliner, you're doing something right. People find it funny. Just because you don't find it funny doesn't mean that you can tell other people what to say in their jokes. You cannot. You're basically threatening these people, saying that, hey, do you want to lose your audience? Then clean up your act.
Because that's their opinion and they're allowed to have it as much as you're allowed to get up on stage and say whatever dumb shit you're trying to say.
But you didn't espouse that at all, and who cares? Their opinion has no bearing on what I can and cannot say. I'm not a comedian, but I'm just saying, these people have no right to dictate what Chris Rock, Seinfeld, that other guy, any of these new comedians that are up there right now, they don't have any bearing on what they can and cannot say. They have no right to tell them what they can and cannot say yet. This is what you're trying to say. It's ridiculous.
Just remember that it is the comedian's job to try and make the audience laugh, and if you fail to deliver enough, after a while, there's not going to be anyone in the audience anymore.
Is that because you've brainwashed the audience into thinking this is offensive? Have you scared the audience away? Because if you go see this person, you're a misogynist, you're a racist. I don't know, but I think that's going to happen eventually. But anyway, people, fun's over, the skit is over, and I can finally rest. So, until next time, I'll see you all later.